The two world wars have had a great impact on Thorpe Thewles. During the Great War, many men volunteered to serve their country. Some of them made the ultimate sacrifice and never returned. Those who did return found that the war had made a great impact on their lives and the lives of those around them. Friendships forged in the trenches remained strong, especially for one man who invited his Maori friend Peter King to visit. He became his brother-in-law and stayed for much longer than expected. During both wars, Thorpe Thewles became home to the evacuees seeking a refuge from the bombing. However, during the Second World War, the village was not as safe as it had been assumed. Again, the men of the village, including the vicar, joined the armed forces. Those who remained at home served as special constables, ARP wardens, or joined the Home Guard. Many young women from Thorpe joined the ATS, serving as drivers and manning anti-aircraft batteries throughout Britain. Even today, nearly 65 years after the end of the war, the landscape around Thorpe Thewles still contains many subtle reminders of this dramatic period in British history.
Very vague recollections of sitting there in the pews and the pulpit was slightly higher and the vicar announcing that we're actually at war. And that must have been a Sunday morning.
And came over the wireless that war had been declared, and that was when we knew about it, and my father said, oh well, we know what we're in for now. Yeah.
Within weeks of the outbreak of the Second World War, Thorpe received its first evacuees, 25 children from St Patrick's Roman Catholic School in Sunderland.
And my mother was the officer in charge of the evacuees that came.
And they came from the Sunderland area, you know, but everybody that had room to take them, they couldn't refuse, they had to take them, you know, so there was one or two billeted in manor cottages.
But they were good kids and they integrated with us and everything.
To us, they were just some more bands to play with, really.
Quite a few Catholics in them, because it was a Church of England school. So, being a Church of England school, we were quite intrigued with these Catholics that came, because we'd never heard of Catholics.
Later, others arrived from London and the industrial areas of Teesside.
At the end of the railway house, which is now Longlass, at the end house there's a family called Tinklers, and they had a family called Featonbys who lived with them, who'd come from London, evacuated from London.
From late 1939, preparations began for the expected enemy air raids.
There was an issue of Anderson shelters.
This thing arrived one day, my dad and Harry Turnbull, and they dug this pit fairly close to the front door, and it took a couple of days to dig, and then they put these corrugated iron sheets up, and then they got all this soil and the earth that they dug out and put it on top, and it had a little doorway in the front, and we were supposed to go in there, but the next morning when we'd finished it and went down and he opened the door and he shouted, "It's full of water!" And it was full of water.
The most deluxe air raid shelter that anybody ever had. It was under the ground, it was nearly as big as this room, and it was behind the house that's there now, Longlass. And as us as kids, after the war was over, it was what we would call our gangelt. And all the kids from Thorpe and everywhere used to come, and we were always in this big air raid shelter.
I was in the front room. It was about bigger than a double bed, and it was just like a big rabbit hutch. We had a metal top, and there was like angle irons on the corners, and then like a mesh round, and at one end there was a door. When the siren used to go, all the youngs used to get in, yeah? Mother also used to get in. My dad wouldn't go in. He liked to know what was going on, stand at the front door.
We just used to hide under the stairs when Father said so.
My mum used to take me and my sister under the stairs because they reckon that most houses that were bombed, the stairs were left standing.
A lot of us just packed in, crammed, till it was all over, till you heard the sirens blow.
They were in the air raid shelter and there was just thumping and thumping all night, and my father was out on home guard duty, and next morning they said, "Bah, you must have had a lot of bombs dropping during the night." And no, it's been a quiet night, and it turned out the cart horse had got on top of the air raid shelter and was walking round and round.
The school was an air raid shelter, yeah.
Like an Anderson shelter in this end of the yard.
I only remember going in it once, and I do distinctly remember going down the steps into
A
it.
couple of times the ladies, you know, the two schoolmistresses got us out and took us all into it. There was maybe, in that school, 20, 30 kids in that school when I went, and you were all huddled in this little place, and so you did get frightened.
We used to sometimes accumulate in the cellar of the Hamilton Russell Arms pub, and they had like little camp beds for air raid shelters. There was one built on the village top, and it was a brick building with like a blast wall built in front of it, and it was like 3 separate door compartments with like a form in, and it would hold probably about maybe 6 people comfortably, and each compartment had like a square hole in the wall, so that if you couldn't get out of York, you could crawl through into the next compartment. But where the air raid shelter was, at the top of the village, they had this wooden post with a slanted wooden board on it, and it was painted a colour, green I think it was, and that was to tell you if it changed colour, get your gas masks on, because there was gas about. But I said to Paul, and I had a laugh at this the other day, I couldn't see people running out of the house every part of the day looking to see if it changed the colour.
In the early years of the war, the threat of poison gas attacks was a very real fear. In the village school, the ARP wardens regularly drilled the local children in the use of their masks.
To be able to get it on very quickly.
Not that we ever did, and we never needed to.
Gas masks was the most dreadful thing, but you had to take your gas mask everywhere you went.
Everybody had, I think you had to, and if you didn't, I think an air raid ARP wardens, I think they could ask you, where's your gas mask?
During the war, Thorpe was served by a village policeman plus volunteer air raid wardens who ensured that the blackout was maintained after dark and that everyone carried their government-issued gas masks with them at all times.
My father was an ARP man.
Go around and make sure that your curtains weren't showing any light.
Well, my mother used to put the blackout up every night at the windows. We only had paraffin lamps, so it would never be very bright.
It was like horsehair, like a black material which is all, you know, fibrous.
And sometimes the bobby would come, knock on the door and tell her, my mother, you can see a bit of light at the corner of the black curtains.
And most people had the windows kind of taped up with sticky tape, because if they got fragmented, the glass wouldn't shatter, you know.
From May 1940, the threat of a German invasion was very real, and a series of anti-invasion defences were rapidly installed along Britain's coast. In Teesside, the line of the Castle Eden branch line, whose cuttings and embankments offered a natural anti-tank obstacle, marked a reserve stop line from where the defending military were to fall back to in the event of the Germans ever gaining control of Teesside's coast. At all strategic crossings and road junctions along this railway line, the Army built a series of concrete roadblocks and defensive pillboxes.
One day there was a big tractor came to the farm who was there to plough big furrows across the field. He was ploughing with this great big, it must have been a big plough, you know, and turning the whole furrow over to dig these trenches, which he said was to stop the aeroplanes landing. But also in the next field, the whole gang of fellas arrived one day, and they put, what, for want of a better word, telegraph poles up.
You know, but they were obviously erected in such a way, a glider trying to land would have had its wings knocked off, and anybody in it would have been either severely injured, or it was obvious that nobody was going to try and land a glider, and that was obvious, that's what it was done for.
In May 1940, the government formed the Home Guard to bolster Britain's meagre defences. Stanley Hall of Middlefield Farm was appointed the lieutenant of the 20 to 30 man strong Thorpe Thewles Home Guard.
When I was 16, I told I was 17 at Thorpe Thewles. 2 or 3 of us did, like, yeah. But I think they knew, because they put us on like first aid duties, learning first aid and that sort of stuff for a year.
Come back, and he came back one day in this khaki uniform looking like a soldier, and he had a gun and some shiny bullets, which probably 303s like that now, but he'd been allocated this gun, you know.
Prior to that, apparently he'd had a piece of wood, you know, It issued with about 5 rounds of ammunition. How long that would have lasted in an invasion, I don't know, but at least I suppose it gave them some confidence probably to face the enemy.
He brought his gun home and he used to have a bayonet which used to fascinate us that went on the top of the gun. Or we would play with his tin hat on and things like that.
Well, it would have been a massacre if there had been an invasion, I'm sure.
Why?
I thought when that good soldiers, were they really? When they all got together, these farmlands, all the top that was farming. Sunday morning, we always went on a Sunday morning every week in Thorpe Thewles. We had manoeuvres, you know, you're supposed to go out in manoeuvres and that. One day I became a lance corporal, and I was taken about half a mile from Thorpe with 2 men, and we had to get into Thorpe without being seen. So the rest of the men were all looking out for us. But what I did, I said to these 2 men, you go that way. We never thought we'd split up like. 2 went that way, they got captured, and I went that way and walked straight in.
And they were called out. Yes, sometimes they went out on patrols because there was a lot of bombing went on the railway, you know.
We should do guard duty. Before I got to Thorpe on the Durham Road, say about half a mile before I got to Thorpe, there was a farm. There was like a hen house. And 2 of us used to be there every night. Supposed to be down home, what was supposed to be guarding, God knows. About manoeuvres, there was this hut in these woods near Thorpe, and there was supposed to be some enemy in this hut. We had to get as near as possible without them spotting us. We were crawling behind the trees. This old faucet was smoked. You got within the yard of this hut, and it lit up. It was hell on. We once played football against Coyote Camp. Thorpe Home Ground, we got well stuffed because they were 10 times fitter than us. That was the only time I remember playing football. I was in goal.
Thorpe Thewles Scout Troop were also invited to support the war effort by acting as messenger boys for the Home Guard.
That the Scouts might be able to be messengers for the Home Guard. I know my dad was dead again it, you know, so that I thought that knocks my chances on the head, you know, so that he said no, he said these boys want to be, they don't want to be like Hitler youth, you know, and so that I think that squashed it for me.
Other local scout troops were also to play their part in the event of the German invasion, as here recalled by the friend of a Fairfield scout.
He's often told the tale that he was in the Scouts, and part of his duty was if the Germans ever landed nearby, he had to run up the railway line and inform the people who were looking after the or guarding the viaduct that the Germans were coming.
In 1940, bands of secret resistance fighters were established to fight back in the event that the Germans ever took control of Britain's coastal regions. These special forces were recruited locally from within the Home Guard and operated in small teams from hidden underground bunkers. The nearest of these bunkers to Thorpe were located in Wynyard Parkland at Bishopton.
I've heard since that my Uncle Arthur was part of a special squad. I understood that he was a war reserve policeman, but it's just very interesting since I met you. I've learned that he's been on this resistance squad. Never mentioned that.
In addition to the Home Guard, Teesside was defended by detachments of the regular army. One such detachment was based at Wynyard Hall.
There were army in Wynyard Park.
I can remember Bren gun carriers coming up Wynyard Road.
And we had 2 soldiers, but they used to come over regularly to help us. And particularly at times like harvest and things like that. And they were good workers.
And the damage that they did in Wynyard Hall was absolutely amazing. The beautiful marble fireplaces that had just had buckets of coal just chucked on them, and were all, Wynyard was in a shocking state when the army left.
A military transport depot and central ammunition dump was located in the buildings now occupied by Dewsons, opposite the Horse and Jockey Public House, supplying ammunition to the gun batteries throughout the area. The largest of these gun emplacements was located in the southeast of Thorpe Thewles, just outside Kyora Hall, in what is now the Roseworth area.
The barrage balloons over what's probably Billingham now, you know, and I remember the soldiers at Kyora Hall, for example. I'd seen those coming home on the bus, and I certainly remember the guns. And the one my mother used to call Big Bertha.
When my mother heard that go on, she was on a high, so as soon as she heard the guns, literally the temperature just went down, and I'm sure I used to hear her say, Big Bertha's on the go.
You could always tell Kyora guns because they were louder than the others.
When the 4.5 caliber guns at Kyora fired in unison, they could be heard for miles. On occasion, the resulting vibrations were known to cause structural damage to local homes.
When the guns you got all the soot down and it went over everything.
I was in 6th Junction, I was at the secondary school, so I went to my parents' bedroom to do my homework on their dressing table. My homework come down, there was a really big crash. And half the ceiling, a great big piece of ceiling had come out. And it must have been made of good stuff in those days. And it landed on this dressing table where I was sat. It would have fell me right on the head if it had come down like. And any little ornaments on the dressing table, they were all smashed to smithereens. Well, if there was a raid on, we were probably outside on the road side, we could see them firing and shout, fire!
So you'd see the flashes.
One sort of was manned by a load of Irishmen from Northern Ireland, so they say, and there'd been a big raid on Belfast. Well, these Irish hunters, Northern hunters. Because on account of this raid, and the next raid, there was all hell let loose, and they're firing at these German planes. Whether they hit anything, I don't know.
We used to put the searchlights on from Kyora, big rays of light, and we used to watch and watch.
And all the searchlights beamed in on this one plane, and you could see this little white dot.
And you could hear boom, boom, boom from Kyora.
It's like bonfire night every night, you know. You don't realise until you think about it just how serious it was.
There was the additional danger of falling shrapnel from the exploding shells fired from the guns at Kyora.
There was a smell in the air, and there was shrapnel all over how everyone. And I think we had one cow killed with shrapnel, but
We'd had the all clear, so the teacher come and said, right, get yourselves home as quick as you can. And we were halfway up the bank, and we heard the guns going off at Kyora, so there must have been some late planes going over, and they were having a crack at them. And that's when I nearly got hit with a piece of shrapnel. Fell out there, we just heard it hit the floor on the road, it just rattled. It was a piece about, it would have hurt you if it did hit you. It was about 3.5 inches long, and about 1.5 inches the other way. And it was ran out, you know, because it'd been raining, the steam was coming off and they had to touch it. Yeah.
After the fall of France in the summer of 1940, German air raids started in earnest. The heavy industry of Teesside was one of their prime targets, and now no one was safe, not even in the outlying villages.
But we never gave it a thought that we would get bombed ourselves, because we were just, as I say, so isolated. It seemed impossible that they would drop any bombs near us. And I think that's what made us feel so safe.
A lot of bombs were dropped round here when you come to think of it.
We're probably trying to hit the railway, because that was an essential railway at that time. You know, for feeding the stuff they wanted to the ICI, to Dorman and Longs.
And there were bomb craters that I saw along the sides of the line, quite a bit going up towards Stillington and that way. Yeah. And there was a bomb gone through my bridge, and we used to see the bomb when we were kids. The bomb had gone through the bridge, and it was wedged in, and whoever disposed of it must have taken a guts out, and the bomb was there. And
the night that they got ICI, and it was just like daylight, my father said, and his words were, if Jerry comes back tonight, we've all had it. I can remember, and that to a small child was very, very frightening.
The most notable damage caused by enemy bombs around Thorp occurred in the evening of Tuesday the 21st of October 1941, when a stick of 5 500-kilogram high explosive bombs were dropped between Thorpe Thewles Station and Wynyard Park. One of these bombs scored a near direct hit on a cottage just northwest of Fulthorpe Farm.
I'd gone to bed, and the gun started at Kyora Hall, and my mother got me up, and we heard this aeroplane.
And there's just suddenly a great whoosh.
Not a bang, but a crump.
The world just seemed to go berserk.
And the blackout curtain, or whatever it is, went hurtling past me and knocked me off the onto the couch where my mother was.
My dad said, "Are you all right?" No, that was my first thing I remember, my dad voicing, "Are you all right?"
The oil lamp had gone on the floor, and I remember my dad getting the clippy mat, and he was burning, and he rolled it up, and he pushed it like that up the fire back.
There'd been this pressure wave, which was obviously the blast, and then a sort of a reactionary pressure wave, which was obviously the suction back from the bomb.
My mother tells me the story, but I don't remember it, of the front door going through the back door.
That must have sucked soot and muck and goodness only knows what from down the chimney and everywhere.
And I don't remember much more about that, except getting carried down the field in a blanket, which is about half a mile down to Thorpe Farm.
Well, everything was debris everywhere. You know, all this stuff we had on the windows and whatnot, it obviously worked. There was a certain amount of broken glass, but what all this stuff had done, it had stopped it flying.
And I understand that the front of the roof had lifted, and all the tiles were off the front of the house. But there was a very large hole in the front garden, about 20 feet across.
When we went up the following day to have a look to see how bad things were, embedded into that wall was the biggest piece of shrapnel off the bomb that had whizzed between all of us, could have taken any of our heads off, and yet there wasn't one of us injured. Now, to me, that was a miracle.
As the war progressed, Britain began to take the fight back to Germany via missions flying out of the Bomber Command airfields.
But on a night, when they were going to Germany, all the planes came from Goosepool, which is now the aerodrome, and all the planes circled. And that is to get the height, see, they were fully loaded with the bombs, and had to get the height before they set off for Germany.
During 1941 or 42, one Allied bomber crash-landed in a field just northwest of Thorpe Thewles.
We were under the stairs in our house, and we could hear this plane. You could tell it was in difficulty.
Next thing I'd heard, it had crashed over the field.
Burst into flames.
Next day we went up to see, you know.
Going with my brother and seeing it, and we sort of pinched bits of the aircraft glass and things.
Word got around it had crashed, and that these pilots had got badly burnt and were throwing themselves into the beck to put the fire out.
The injured crew from the Thorpe plane crash were treated in a military hospital in Sedgefield. This same hospital served many of the wounded soldiers.
After D-Day, there was loads of trains came through Thorpe Thewles to Wynyard Station.
Yeah, the big Red Cross on the side.
With injured soldiers now, because they were, in those days when you were injured you wore like a blue suit and like a red tie.
You'd get off at Wynyard Station and either go to Sedgefield Hospital or the Wynyard Hall.
Right. With increasing numbers of men entering the armed forces, gaps were left in both industry and on the land that had to be filled by women. In the area around Thorpe Thewles, this was most notable by the presence of land army girls.
I seem to recollect 2 land girls working on the land at Turnbull.
They lived in hostels in Wolverstone. They had their own vehicle, and one of the girls used to drive them. Agnes used to be the driver. Remember Agnes? They were from Tyneside, really.
As the tide of war changed in Britain's favour, prisoners of war were taken in ever-increasing numbers. Many of these prisoners were held in local POW camps.
You know, prisoners of war, because there was quite a few prisoners of war on the farms around here. And I used to wear slippers made by the prisoners of war.
The first ones that I know of that came were Italian.
And they worked for McLaren's farm, and they worked at Hall's farm at Carlton and Swinbank.
And then Germans came as well.
Ex-German prisoner lived with us, and he used to come across the quay or the was the German prisoner of war camp. That was his headquarters. He had to go back there to get his cake. And he used to get a big slice of his fruit cake, absolutely delicious. It was like army rations, you know. Of course you never got currants and nothing like that during the war. And it was just a ticket, you know. I mean, we got stuck into it as well because he didn't need it all himself.
They used to come with the warders.
They used to cycle around to the farm, do a day's work and then cycle back, and then eventually they used to live in loose boxes that the cattle or horses would be in, and they used to put beds in.
And with my grandma having the shop, they used to go in there. I mean, they were free to walk around, you know.
Dad used to get herons, pickled herons for them, and they were allowed one lot of cigarettes a week.
One of them was off a German submarine, and they called him Rudy.
We had one called Fritz, who was a lovely man.
I mean, they were spot on people, like, you know.
At the end of the war, Dad kept two of them on.
On Christmas Eve 1944, the only V1 flying bomb to appear over Teesside flew over Wynyard Park to the east of Thorpe Thewles, where it was seen and heard by several locals.
There was a flying bomb came over, wasn't there?
I saw it go across.
It was about 7:30 in the morning, I think.
I actually saw the flickering of the...
But it landed on the cricket field anymore, so it didn't do much damage.
The end of the war was marked by public holidays with national and local celebrations.
That I was in school and the school ma'am told us that, you know, Mr. Church had been on the wireless or something and the war was ended. My father and mother put up a huge stage in the railway waiting room, which was fairly big, and we had concerts and parties, I think, for days.
There were further family celebrations thereafter on the return of serving military personnel to the village, some of whom had been away from home for over 4 years.
I couldn't wait for my dad to get home, like. I had a few folks, kids used to say, your dad's come home, and he used to tear down. And it wasn't him, like, you know. Kidding me, you know.
Huge celebrations when the war was won, and VE Day we used to call it, wasn't it? That's it, yeah. Fantastic.